Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiriduluale, the headlines. 2 are injured in Russian drone attacks on Kyiv as Moscow's forces resume attacks on Ukraine's capital. President Vladimir Zelensky says power has been restored to almost 6 million people after the Russian strikes. And Moscow is set to begin a new campaign to encourage Russians to enlist in the armed forces and fight in Ukraine. A warm welcome to the program and happy new week. We begin in Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, where several explosions were heard and 2 people have been injured, as well as homes damaged after Russian drones attacked the Ukrainian capital in the early hours of today. The mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, says critical infrastructure facilities have also been damaged. Ukrainian air defenses are said to have shot down 9 Russian drones as Moscow's forces resumed attacks on the capital. The Kyiv City Military Administration gave the all-clear after the capital came under fire from what it said was a barrage of ammunition. In the meantime, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has said that Ukraine has managed to restore power to almost 6 million people in the last 24 hours after massive Russian strikes against the electricity generating system. Mr. Zelensky said there were problems with the supply of heat and water, saying Kyiv, as well as Vinnytsia and Lviv, further to the west, were experiencing the most difficulty.
The main thing today is the energy sector. Over the day, we have managed to bring electricity back to almost 6 million Ukrainians. Repair works are ongoing now. They continue without interruption after yesterday's terrorist attack. Of course, there's still a lot of work to do to stabilize the system. There are problems with the supply of heat. There are big problems with the water supply. The most difficult situation is in Kyiv and the region, Vinnytsia and the region, Lviv and the region.
Meanwhile, the president says as well that protecting Ukraine's borders was a, quote, constant priority and that his country was ready for all possible scenarios with Russia and its ally Belarus. Mr. Zelensky made the remarks on the eve of a visit to Belarus by Russian President Vladimir Putin amidst discussions of a possible new offensive by Moscow and suggestions it could originate in Belarus.
During the meeting, we also talked in detail about the border. Defense of the border with Russia as well as with Belarus, also a constant priority. We are preparing for all possible defense scenarios, irrespective of any attempt by anyone to force Minsk hand, as this would not help them in any way. No more than to all other sick ideas tried in this war against Ukraine and Ukrainians. Air defense capabilities are a constant priority for the commanders-in-chief's meetings. I am stressing this once more. Esteemed partners, by helping us to defend our skies, by providing us with modern air defense systems, faster and in sufficient quantity, you can deprive the terrorist state of its main terror instrument. It will be one of the strongest actions which would hasten the end of the war. Russia would have to take steps to end aggression when it wouldn't be able to go on with its missile strikes.
And Moscow has begun a new campaign to encourage Russians to enlist in the armed forces and fight in Ukraine, in spite of the Kremlin having denied needing more recruits. In an attempt to attract more volunteers to the front, according to Western media, Russian propaganda videos posted on social networks in the past few days are trying to appeal to Russian men through the narratives of patriotism, morality, and upward social mobility. According to the Western media, one of the videos features a young man who is choosing to fight instead of partying with his male friends, and then surprises everyone by buying himself a car with the money he made from fighting on a military contract. A further example shows a middle-aged man leaving the factory job that doesn't pay him enough to sign a military contract and go to the front. In late September, President Vladimir Putin announced a partial military mobilization which saw more than 300,000 people across Russia mobilized at its war in Ukraine, had failed to make progress. Thousands of men have fled Russia in order to avoid being conscripted, and fears of a second mobilization in the new year are mounting. And staying with the Russian leader, he has met with his military chiefs. On the same day, his forces launched another wave of missiles at Ukraine's infrastructure. Mr. Putin spent most of the weekend at the headquarters of the special military operation, discussing ideas for what Russia's next move should be. It comes as some Ukrainian military officials claimed Russia was planning an offensive perhaps early next year. Footage from the meeting showed Mr. Putin flanked by Defense Minister General Sergei Shoigu and Armed Forces Chief Valery Gerasimov. General Gerasimov's presence ends rumors circulating online that he had been dismissed from the position. The meeting followed claims by the commander of Ukraine's military, General Valery Zaluzhny, that Moscow could seek to launch a new offensive in early 2023. He warned that Russia was preparing around 200,000 troops for that attack. Let's swerve to the United Kingdom, which has seen its last day of the cold snap before temperatures soared to highs of 14 degrees centigrade. Warnings for snow, ice, and rain were in place for much of the country over the weekend, including an amber alert for ice in parts of northern England. Temperatures are expected to jump by 15 degrees within 24 hours as a result of warmer air coming in from the Atlantic. Weather forecasts showed that the bitter cold, frosty weather was turning into something much milder, wetter, and windier. And the British government has said it is resolute on pay after nursing unions threatened to escalate strike actions if ministers do not join talks within 48 hours of last Tuesday's walkout. Members of the Royal College of Nursing are due to stage a second strike on the 20th of December, that's tomorrow. Cabinet Minister Oliver Dowden insisted ministers were, quote, reasonable, but had a duty to keep finances under control. He insisted that nurses' pay should be decided by the National Health Service Pay Review Board. In July, this body recommended a £1,400 rise, with slightly more for experienced nurses, an increase of about 4% on average. The RCN is calling for a pay rise of 19%, but union leader Pat Collins said this was a starting point and any new offer would be put to members. Meanwhile, about 1,200 members of the military and 1,000 civil servants are to be drafted in to cover for striking ambulance and border force staff over Christmas. Some 10,000 ambulance staff in England and Wales will strike on the 21st and 28th of December in a pay dispute. Unions say military staff are not, quote, sufficiently trained to take on ambulance roles. But Health Secretary Steve Barclay said his #1 priority is keeping patients safe. However, he declined to discuss political debates, stressing that the military is directed by the government to serve the nation. The head of the armed forces has warned against viewing troops as the go-to option when it comes to covering strike options. Let's talk now to Dr. Tony Agbons, researcher, senior lecturer at Ruskin University in the British capital, London. Good morning to you, Dr. Agbons. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Ladi, and compliment of the season.
Same to you, but it doesn't look like it's going to be a particularly easy season coming with all these issues on the front burner. Of course, on one side you have good news in terms of the weather. We understand that it's going to become warmer over the next couple of days, reaching highs of 14 degrees. But that will be scant comfort for those who need ambulance services, who need to travel, the border force, nurses, and all of that. How is this panning out in the UK? I know the last time I spoke to you, it wasn't quite as imminent, and we were hoping that maybe some kind of compromise could be reached. But it doesn't seem as if that is happening, and the strikes are due tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you, Ladi, for the way you have described the scenario here in the UK at the moment. It is very bleak as the winter. It is, it's not funny at all. There is a feeling of kind of deja vu as far as, you know, life in the UK is. I tell you, the different strike action by different professional bodies and workers in the last couple of weeks has been mind-boggling. Like you have rightly enumerated, you mentioned the nurses and rail workers, postal workers, the border force, ambulance driver, driving instructors. In fact, just name it. They've all been, angling to go on strike. And government officials here have, been really helpless. They have not really done anything substantial. And I like the way you use the word resolute. In fact, I will even upgrade that adjective higher and say they are defiant, because they are not really discussing with these workers in a manner that most of us would have liked. And if I tell you the level of disruption here is really, really alarming. And the Christmas is not really looking like the Christmas that we all expected.
Now, of course, part of the reason why we can describe what the government is doing as resolute and defiant, as you described it, is the fact that, let's put it bluntly, the government has no money. So, I mean, promising anybody any large increases in wages and so on, there is nowhere this money is going to come from. First, there was the lots and lots of debt that the government went into when COVID-19 came up. There is the one that happened in the aftermath of Brexit. And then, of course, there was the position that happened under Liz Truss when the government's finances took on a really big hit in the aftermath of the mini budget that has now been reversed. And then, of course, there's the continuing idea of energy prices as a result of the war in Ukraine. Do you think people may now be blaming former Prime Minister Boris Johnson for taking such a central role in the war in Ukraine, particularly because it appears as if, unlike some of the other European countries, Britain is particularly hit by this issue of energy crisis, which has fed into the cost of living crisis?
Yeah, you've made some valid point there, and which a lot of analysts agree that in terms of expenditure, government expenditure have increased. On one hand, with the crisis going on in between Russia and Ukraine, the UK has put a lot of financial outlay in that project, so to speak. So that is on one hand. But the point people like us don't agree, when you look at resolution of conflict, whether it's trade union or military, there have to be discussions. I think this is my personal opinion, and a lot of people may challenge me for this. I think that the officials of the UK government, from the PM as the Prime Minister, they've not really been courteous enough, discussing with these workers. Yes, the workers are not expecting, from information we gather, they are not expecting that. For instance, take the nurses who are asking for about 19% pay rise. The truth is, when you go for a negotiation, you bring something to the table, and the other side will bring something to the table, and then you find a middle ground, and everybody agree. So, but for UK ministers to always say there is no money, they are not discussing. For instance, when the Royal College of Nurses, the umbrella body for majority of nurses in the UK, were threatening to go on strike, and the deadline was itching closer, the Secretary of State, Steve Barclay, called for a meeting, and then, shockingly, he walked out of the meeting after about less than half an hour. That, for most of us, was really disgusting. It's not a ministerial behavior. And it goes to show how politicians, treat, treat ordinary citizens. It was not the best. Then when you look at it economically, yes, it's a hard time. The government may not be able to, pay all these workers what they require, but there have to be discussions. And let me be very frank with you, Ladi. The truth of the matter is that many of these workers, frontline workers, they earn below the living wage. A lot of them, work conditions, they are not really, really good. So I think it's all about pay parity, making adjustments, where necessary. There's been a lot of pay freezes in the UK in the past. So pay rises have not moved along with the consumer price index. So this is all what have dovetailed into the situation we have today. So that you see that, for instance, if you look at the border force, their union, Unison, GMB, and Unite, an independent peer review committee have recommended that they be paid 4.5%. But this border force, very critical security architecture here in the UK, have said they are not taking 4.5% because inflation is above 10%. Because over the years, their pay have not been increased. So this is the situation where we are.
As we approach Christmas, I mean, we are in the Christmas week, Dr. Agbonza, and you did say that it's looking quite bleak. I mean, apart from all the effects of all these strikes, which are linked to the cost of living, I know that the last time we spoke, the one that may actually come to affect citizens the more is that, on the other hand, we're also being warned of food shortages, a possibility of food shortages as a result of the impact of this energy crisis, production snafus, and then the whole idea of cost of moving goods now as a result, not of the war in Ukraine alone, but the prior problem of Brexit. So some things are meeting themselves on the ground, as some Nigerians would say, that one problem is meeting the other one on the ground and sitting on top of it. How do you see the citizens meandering through this, and what really, realistically, can the government do to ameliorate this situation?
Yeah, I think, I really like your description that things are meeting things on the ground. But it's so unfortunate that, like we have discussed on this program, after Brexit came the COVID-19 pandemic. And just as we're recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, then came the Russia-Ukraine crisis. So it's really unfortunate. But I think where the UK have had problems in terms of fiscal and economic problems is some decisions that government have not taken properly. They have not really looked at the far-reaching effects. So if you look at the Brexit, the challenge that came from Brexit, when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, there were still a lot of discussions with the European Union, and a lot of agreements were signed as to how there could be a seamless, transaction between the UK and the European Union. So a number of agreements were signed so that distribution channels for goods and services will not be affected. So, but there have also been some level of high-handedness from both sides, talking about the UK and the European Union. It was a case of, who will blink first. So that was there. And then the major problem is this crisis. For me, I think what the UK and other countries in the West should be going for now is an early resolution of this Russia-Ukraine crisis. Because the longer this crisis goes on, the more damage it's going to do to the UK economy and most economies in the Western world, and even as far as even in Africa. You saw this week, the US president had to call a meeting of over 50 African leaders, and they were, talking about partnership and collaboration as far as the global economy is concerned. Let's not also forget, this same week, which was a very good call, the Indian Prime Minister, and Narendra Modi, he called on the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, that he should use dialogue and diplomacy in resolving this crisis. So I think the crisis between Russia and Ukraine is the major challenge facing global economy at the moment.
My final question to you will have to do with that support that citizens like yourself were promised in the aftermath of the start of this war, first by Boris Johnson, of course, by Liz Truss, and then, of course, that promise was reaffirmed by Rishi Sunak once he took over as Prime Minister, which is the support for the energy bills. How is that coming along? Is that support coming? Are you receiving it? And if so, how much of a difference is it making to helping cope with the significant rises in prices in terms of energy bills?
Yeah, thank you. This support is coming, but to be honest with you, it's just it's a figment, and it's just a pinch of the salt. It's not really something substantial. And to be honest, I think the government of the United Kingdom also, they now need to sit with the energy company, because during this crisis they've increased energy prices instead of taxing them. You know, so the support is coming, but it's not substantial. That is my very answer to that question. It's not enough.
Indeed, Dr. Agbos, your initial description of the coming Christmas, most people would not want to say it's correct, but I mean, facing reality, it does look that way. But one hopes that between now and then, at least, action will take place on the strikes, while, as you pointed out, some attempts will also be made to resolve the Ukraine-Russia war one way or the other. So that 2023 will look less bleak. But for now, thank you so much for your time on the program. I wish you a pleasant Christmas in spite of all the odds, and hope that when we speak next, it will be of happier things. Thank you so much, Dr. Agbons.
Thank you, Lade. Have a great day.
Thank you. And coming up after the break, Bakhmut residents venture out for supplies and groceries, even as loud explosions and shelling hit the frontline Ukrainian town. Details after the break. Stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Drone video released shows a battle raging in Ukraine's eastern city of Bakhmut on the front line of Russia's invasion of its western neighbor. Several explosions were seen in the video, with buildings destroyed or on fire. The video source says Russia was destroying civilian infrastructure with artillery and mortar. Bakhmut, with a population of 80,000 people before Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February, has become a symbol of the grinding warfare playing out among much of the Eastern Front, where enemy positions have rarely budged more than a few hundred meters in recent weeks. Military experts say the city appears to be of little strategic value to either side, but Russian forces, including mercenaries fighting for the Wagner Group, have in recent days intensified their bombardment. Meanwhile, there's no backing down for residents as they bought groceries and clothes in the street, even as loud explosions sounded in front-line Ukrainian towns. Firefighters shared bread with local residents near their various stations. As Russian strikes target the same positions over and over again, battling the fires has become a growing challenge, according to the local fire service. Before the war, Bakhmut was best known for its popular brand of Soviet-era champagne-style wine and a nearby salt mine. Its capture by Russian forces would be a rare piece of good news for Moscow after having suffered a series of humiliating battlefield setbacks against foes they initially thought would be easily overcome. According to the regional governor, fewer than 12,000 residents remain in the town that has sustained serious damage. Let's swerve now and talk to Laddie Williams of our business desk for more on the business happenings with this conflict. Morning, Laddie.
Good morning.
The CEO of UNIPA, now that's a name that many of our viewers will be familiar with,
right,
because we've come across it several times.
Exactly.
Has told shareholders to approve a planned bailout by Germany that will cost more than 50 billion euros. Yeah. Why?
So it's we know UNIPA there. That's the biggest importer, of Russian gas, and it's a massive electricity company, in Germany. And we've seen that company, hit by a myriad of problems this year, especially because of the cutoff of, Russian gas, to them, because they were the largest importer of Russian gas. And we've seen how that has impacted the company. They're having to buy gas at more expensive, rates because of, obviously, we know the war and how, the sanctions, have caused these problems between UNEPA and, the cheap Russian gas they were getting, before. So now we've seen that the German government, they've gotten to go ahead to, for the takeover, of the company. So it's going to be more of state-owned now, because at the end of the day, we see shareholders, struggling at this point because the company cannot keep up, with the issues they have now with getting, cheap gas. So the CEO is saying, you know what, it's either we get this bailout or they'll have to file for insolvency. And we know that will be a big problem, because this is like the major importer.
Yeah, and if they file for bankruptcy,
gas,
then the problem is going to be very different.
Exactly. So that would, add to their gas, issues at this time. So we're seeing the CEO ask that they get this bailout, and obviously the government already, they bought about almost, they should be getting the go-ahead today, on moving forward on how to, if they're going to take full control, of the companies. We're still awaiting the shareholders to actually, approve and, agree to that. So it's obviously turbulent times for the company, but, looking ahead, it looks like it's more like the German government is going to take over at some point and bail this company out. And we'll be looking at how, this impacts their business, going forward into 2023. We know it's still quite a tough year, for the German people at this point, because at the end of the day, the gas issues are still there. We've seen how they've been moving on to get LNG, trying to get that terminal going.
4 regasification plants
exactly.
that they've just commissioned.
So they're making a lot of plans, at this time. We'll keep tracking to see how it all plays out going forward.
Now, Russia seems to have bucked the trend. Last week we were talking about interest rate rises, as to whether or not they'd be higher or equal to what were the last rises. But Russia is keeping its interest rate steady.
Yeah. Quite steady, and it's quite incredible at a time where we've seen the Bank of England, raise rates, even though not as high as before. We've also seen, the ECB raise rates. We've seen the US also raise rates, even though it was 50 basis points.
Not 75.
Not 75, but it still rattled, the markets at the end of the day. But obviously Russia, still seems to buck the trend, at this point, because we know how, they've managed to control, most of the happenings in the economy, going forward. So the central bank governor there is saying that, what, we're seeing, consumer prices rise moderately. We're also seeing, subdued demand, at this point. So it makes sense to actually keep the interest rates
steady. So that we can keep this going.
Exactly. So they're actually seeing that the forecast for next year, they're seeing the inflation rate will actually drop, further. They're also seeing that they will, keep the rates also, lower going forward, because at the end of it, we know inflation is still a major problem, but, because of the sanctions and, how the Russian government have been able to, keep most of those information, from us. So we're not able to really see exactly, because, most of
or build it into the cost share and all of that.
So most of the data coming out there is mostly, controlled data. So, but at the end of the day, we've seen analysts say that the cracks, in the economy obviously are there, and we'll continue to see it, going forward. And obviously it's a tough one, because we're seeing Europe already, diversifying away from
Russian gas and oil.
Exactly.
So they either look for new markets, or they're going to lose the revenue for that.
Exactly, because they actually need, most of that revenue. But hopefully, at some point, the war ends, but we know that the damage,
would be extensive,
is still
and longer lasting.
So we'll keep watching how the Russian economy is able to bounce back, after the war.
Speaking about the Eurozone, the euro, which is their currency, has peaked against the dollar.
Yeah.
I remember you telling us here that the dollar had strengthened.
Yes.
It was on a bull run for much of this year.
Rampage,
But it does seem as if it's beginning to tail back a little,
yeah, we
particularly
saw
against the euro.
Yeah, we saw the DXY actually ease, this year towards the end of this year because obviously we saw that the central bank in the U.S., the U.S. Fed, they were easing, on the rate hikes, and they did, even though. Most investors still see the Fed as very hawkish at this point. They did ease, to 50 basis points. So we're seeing investors actually, get a little respite there. We see them, try to move away to other risk assets. We saw some rallies, some bear market rallies. But obviously we had that fear, and it did happen earlier this year when the euro hit parity,
right.
With the US dollar. First time in 20 years. It was a massive event. But we've seen some strengthening, come in place at this time. And obviously we've seen the ECB actually raise rates. So, that has kind of like, given investors some confidence. But the fears, are still there about, the recession fears. So we saw the dollar actually, gain some strength, last week. And obviously, with the recession fears, you always see investors try to move to the safe haven asset, which is the U.S. dollar, even though we've seen that pullback. But some analysts are expecting some kind of rally will come again, because...
Before Christmas.
For the U.S. dollar. But obviously, it's the outlook now is for 2023. It's been a tough 2022 for investors, and some are still seeing more hard times, in 2023, for investors, because we still have the headwinds there, inflation and all of that. So we will keep watching. But right now, we're seeing that the euro did strengthen on Friday, about 1.07, but we saw a pullback, coming as well. We're still watching how the currency actually strengthens this week.
How are the markets doing at the start of the year?
So the markets are not looking so bad, but we still have the recession fears, at this point, and that's still driving investor sentiment, and there's still fear, extreme fear in most of these markets. We've seen, I looked at the futures this morning, they were kind of like in the red this morning, still oscillating, investors trying to make a decision, whether to go full in on risk assets, expecting some kind of Santa rally, but yeah. We're already halfway
they're
through.
Not 100% sure that's going to happen.
Exactly. So we've been having the bear market rallies, most of this year. And obviously, every investor is trying to find that bottom. Where is the bottom? That's where the opportunity arises for you to plug in.
Exactly. And hope that, of course, it's going to go back up.
Yeah, but we've seen all the bleak outlooks and forecasts. We've gotten from the World Bank and the IMF and all of that. So at the end of the day, it's the recession fear still driving sentiment. We're seeing Bitcoin there losing all of the gains. It got recently when we got that CPI print from the US. So we've seen Bitcoin hit about $16,000, still hovering around that level. Some still expect it's going to go lower. So still tough times, for investors in this market.
Really tough times. Thank you so much, Laddie, as always. Laddie and the team will be around after this show for Business Morning and later on for Business Incorporated.
Thank you.
Let's talk now to Vince Onyekwelu, security expert on this situation. Good morning to you, Mr. Onyekwelu. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good morning.
Let me begin from something that seems to have caught many observers by surprise, which is that contrary to what was expected, the situation in terms of the conflict is not letting up. Many had said, look, okay, because of the winter, there was going to be some kind of lull in the conflict, partly because equipment and people would be difficult to move, particularly troops. But Russia continues with the air attack on several Ukrainian cities. And then, of course, there are troop battles in places like Bakhmut. So what do you think is driving this?
Obviously, I think it was the USA government that gave that narrative that in the next 4 months or 3 months of the winter, that the war is going to, it's going to reduce, that the operation is going to reduce. And I think that is the US government trying to give hope to the Ukrainians and hope to the government of Ukraine. And obviously, you don't do such. When you do such, your opponent will feel challenged to prove to you that we are not letting up. So the US government shouldn't have made that statement that the Russians would reduce their warring capacity during the winter. I think that was what even inspired the Russians to even show the US government that you are wrong, that we have capacity to fight both during the summer, during the winter, during the spring, or during the autumn. And also remember, a lot of facilities has been weaponized in this war. So you will hear the narrative that winter has been weaponized by the Russians. Every weapon of war is fair during a war. Somebody also weaponized the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. Somebody also weaponized the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Somebody also weaponized the ability of Russia to make income from the sales of their natural assets, which is oil and gas. Somebody weaponized the sanctions against Russia. So you cannot just look at one part of weaponized operational warfare. Everything is weaponized in warfare, even lies, even narratives, even the perspective that Russia will stop fighting during the winter season. So everything is fair in war.
Given that scenario, overall, from what you said, you of course expected that the conflict would continue, and it has on several fronts. But given where we are now, it does appear as if there's a stalemate of some kind. Neither side is able to inflict a decisive victory or a decisive defeat on the other. That's the way it appears at this point. So it's become a slow, grinding war kind of attrition. The Russians attack by air. The Ukrainians try to take back land spaces. People are killed on both sides. There's mobilization. Both sides are talking about new offensives in the new year. All sounding so grim. What do you think is about to happen or is going to happen over this Christmas and into the new year?
A lot is already happening. Number one, the international communities can be very dangerous when they support you for a warfare. What do I mean by this? Number one, the Russians and the Americans are working in partnership on a space project currently. So it's so unbelievable that the Americans will, for any reason, collaborate with the Russians for a space project. I would have thought that the Americans would have rejected such partnership. But hey, they went ahead to partner with the Russians for an international space project because the Chinese are coming when it comes to space project. Number two, look at what happened yesterday. Mr. Zelensky of Ukraine wrote to FIFA to allow him to make a statement during the closing ceremony of the FIFA World Cup in Qatar, which ended yesterday. What happened? FIFA rejected, and I think it's an insult. It was like a kick on the teeth of Mr. Zelensky, because I would have expected the USA that forced FIFA, UEFA, and other international sports federations to ban Russian participation in international sports. I would have expected them to coerce, to convince FIFA to allow Mr. Zelensky to modify the first statement that he gave out, because it was a video recorded statement. But it didn't happen. He was denied the opportunity. That would have been a big, massive propaganda for Ukraine to sell their narratives to the world, and he was rejected. So you see that the international communities are getting fed up in the war between Ukraine and Russia. The citizens of Europe are suffering because of the high cost of gas in the winter season. So nations are no longer comfortable with the war. And when you talk about the slow, grim nature of the war, it's not slow, grim. What started this war was Russia saying that Ukraine will not allow NATO to install missile batteries in Ukraine facing Russia. So Russia has made it impossible for NATO to have those artillery batteries in Ukraine. So that is a victory for Russia. Russia has cordoned up enough Ukrainian territories that even if NATO has to install those anti-missile batteries today, Moscow will no longer be in their target. So Russia has achieved their ends when he says NATO must not install. And even if NATO has to install, they must put Moscow outside the target of NATO missile batteries. So it looks green, but the truth is, when you fight a war in your own soil, look at there's what you call a missile graveyard in Ukraine, where all the whole missiles, all the whole bomb shells that were dropped by the Russians on Ukraine, where they have been parked. Do you know the side effects of such ballistic armaments? All those containers, the carbon density on the ecosystem, on the ecology of Ukraine, on the effect on the underground water system, the side effect is huge. So it looks slow green. It looks like the war is dragging, but somebody is winning and somebody is losing. And in conclusion, don't forget that in 2024, we are about 14 days or 13 days into the new year. 2024, there will be an election in Ukraine. And right now, there's no opposition party in Ukraine. Because of the war, Ukraine opposition parties has been squashed. So the question is, with this war, with this suffering, with this death, with these destructions, what is the hope of the election in Ukraine 2024? I'm sorry, Ukraine is losing. Though Russians are losing financially, but they found other ways to sell their oil to other interested parties. Even some EU countries are still buying oil and gas from Russia, from the Chinese and from the Indians indirectly.
Absolutely. That of course, that information has become more well known. That some of those countries are going round the back, unofficially are getting this, which is why they are not particularly concerned one way or the other what is happening with the sanctions. But a very interesting perspective you bring to this. And in the new year, I just want to ask one final point. In the new year, do you think that perhaps what you said about those in support of Ukraine being frustrated and fed up, I believe was the word you used, they might in some ways persuade Ukraine to come to the negotiating table with the Russians, just as the Indians, the Chinese, the Koreans, the Iranians would persuade Russia to also come to that table, because even if a decisive victory is inflicted militarily, there still has to be some kind of conversation after that.
Exactly. You're correct. Absolutely. Don't forget, in war, you don't accidentally die in war. In war, you accidentally survive, because war means death. So anything in war, you don't accidentally die. You don't accidentally get killed. In war, you accidentally survive by luck or by your sheer skills or by your knowledge of warfare or by your knowledge of survival skills. So the bottom line here is we need to look for peace. Whether it's half-baked peace, but the fighting needs to stop. In Ukraine today, there are so many foreign fighters in Ukraine. Many of the weapons sent to Ukraine will end up in what we call, I don't want to use the word black market because I'm a black person. I don't want everything negative to be called a black market, black money, black sheep. Most of the weapons being sent to Ukraine will enter into the hands of mercenaries of war. Those weapons may end up in the wrong hands in Europe, in Arab world, in Asia. Most likely it will not get up to the Americans, will not get up to North America or South America. But most of those weapons will get into the wrong hands, which could be used by criminals, terrorist organizations to wage war against Africans, Europeans, and Asians, and Arabs. This war has to stop. And there must be a system for us to talk about peace, peace, peace. The people of Ukraine who do not have heater, energy, in this winter season, it's hellfire for them. Mr. Zelensky and Mr. Putin, they are all med people. They have comfort for their families. But the ordinary Russians, by the borderlines of Ukraine, and everybody in Ukraine is suffering economically, politically, health-wise, education, no schools, no hospitals, nothing. Come on. It's not fair to the people of Ukraine and Russia. It's not fair.
Indeed. Mr. Vince Oyekwelu, thank you so much for your perspective. Unique perspective, that is, at this point in time, bringing to the fore quite a number of things that many people... Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Ukraine's leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, has proposed holding a global peace summit this winter. Mr. Zelensky, as you probably have already heard, had wanted to appear via video link before Argentina took on defending champions France at Doha's Lusail Stadium for the final, with an expected global audience of hundreds of millions with his proposal.
Today, we'll witness a common victory, the celebration of human spirit. This World Cup proved time and again that different countries and nationalities can decide who is the strongest in the fair play, but not in the playing with fire, on the green playing field and not on the red battlefield. This is the dream of so many people when players compete, making everybody enjoy peace. Every father would like to take his son to a football match all over the world, and every mother would like her son to be back from war. Whenever it is, Ukraine strives for peace more than anything else. We offered peace formula to the world, absolutely fair. We offered it because there are no champions in war. There can be no draw. So I announced the initiative to hold a global peace formula summit this winter, the summit to unite all nations of the world around the cause of global peace. Stadiums, stands get empty after the match, and after the war, cities remain empty. That's why wars must fail, and peace is to become the champion, as it is here in Qatar now. The World Cup, but not the World War. It is possible. Please support Ukraine in our efforts to restore peace. Join Global Peace Formula Summit and become a champion of peace.
And finally, on the program, Russia says it will deploy musicians and singers to the front lines of its war in Ukraine to boost troop morale. The Defense Ministry announced the formation of the Frontline Creative Brigade this week, saying it would also include circus performers. The UK's Ministry of Defence highlighted the brigade's creation in an intelligence update yesterday. This comes as UK defence officials said low morale continues to be, quote, a significant vulnerability across much of the Russian force. The UK said the new creative brigade, which follows a recent campaign urging the public to donate musical instruments to troops, is in keeping with the historic use of military music and organized entertainment to boost morale. But it questioned whether the new brigade would actually distract troops who have been primarily concerned about very high casualty rates, poor leadership, pay problems, lack of equipment and ammunition, and lack of clarity about the war's objectives. And that's how we wrap up this Monday morning's program. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akperi-Duluale. Do watch out for updates on all our stories throughout the day, but particularly within the world today from 5 o'clock. But for now, to have yourselves a pleasant day ahead. Good morning.